You can hear the wood being stacked beneath you, each log placed with precision, like the careful arrangement of evidence in a courtroom. The executioner works methodically, building your death piece by piece. You're 19 years old, and 4 days ago, you thought you'd saved your life by signing a confession. 4 days ago, they promised you mercy. Now you understand the mercy was the trap. Before we step into that final morning, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching this from. It amazes me every time that a story from 1431 still pulls us all into the same room, across centuries and continents, searching for the same truth. This is Rouen, France, May 30th, 1431. The girl chained to the stake in the old market. Square isn't just any prisoner. 2 years ago, she walked into the French court claiming God had sent her to save a dying kingdom. Military commanders laughed. Nobles dismissed her as delusional. But then she did something that shattered every rule of medieval warfare. She won. Orleans fell to the French after months of English stranglehold. The impossible became possible. A peasant girl from Domremy, who couldn't read or write, had rewritten the fate of nations. The English bought her for 10,000 livres, not as a prisoner of war, as an icon they needed to destroy. Because Joan of Arc wasn't dangerous for what she could do on a battlefield anymore. She was dangerous for what she represented, living proof that God might actually favor France. If they could make her confess that her visions were demonic, that her voices were hallucinations, that her divine mission was fraud, they wouldn't just be killing a soldier. They'd be killing hope itself. But here's what makes her final days so devastating. She didn't die in battle. She didn't die refusing to surrender. She died because she trusted a system that was designed from the beginning to destroy her. And the most brilliant, cruel part, they made her destroy herself. Let's go back to understand how the trap was built. January 1431. Joan arrives in Rouen in chains. The trial that begins is supposed to be ecclesiastical bishops, theologians, church law, the appearance of religious justice. But it's theater, pure, calculated theater. She's held not in a convent with nuns, as church law requires for accused women, but in a military fortress. 5 English soldiers guard her cell 24 hours a day. The judges are pro-English. The prosecutor works directly with English military command. Our advocates aren't defending her. They're arguing against her in disguise. For 70 sessions over 4 months, they hammer at her. The brightest theological minds in France versus a teenage girl who cannot read. She has no lawyer, no advisor, no one. And she's winning. Not officially, she never convinced these judges. But she's winning in a way that terrifies them. When they ask if she knows she's in God's grace, a classic trap designed so any answer condemns you, she delivers one of the most perfect responses in legal history. If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me. The theologians stare at her. She's just escaped an inescapable question. They ask if God hates the English. She answers, "Of the love or hate God may have for the English, I know nothing. But I do know they will all be driven from France, except those who die here." It's not defiance, it's precision. She's quoting scripture back at men who spent decades in universities. She's parrying every doctrinal trap they set. When they threaten her with tortures, show her the rack. The strappado instruments designed to systematically dislocate joints while keeping victims' conscious seat. Looks at them and says, "Truly, if you were to tear my limbs from me and drive my soul from my body, I would not tell you anything more. And if I did say anything, I would later declare that you had forced me to say it." She's telling them that confessions extracted through torture are legally worthless. A 19-year-old peasant is schooling them on jurisprudence. They back down from torture, not out of mercy, out of practicality. Her testimony would be compromised. So they switch to something more elegant: psychological warfare through exhaustion, isolation, and fear. May 24th, 1431. The day everything breaks. They drag Joan to the cemetery of St. Ouen. Thousands have gathered. Word has spread. This is the day she burns. There's a scaffold, preachers, Bishop Pierre Cauchon, orchestrating everything. He's ambitious. He's been trying to become Archbishop of Rouen for years, and the English have made it clear. Condemn Joan and the position is yours. But before the fire, they offer her a choice. A notary steps forward with a document. He reads a version aloud: renounce your visions. Admit your voices are demonic. Agree to wear women's clothing. Obey the church. Sign this, and your life will be spared. You'll go to prison instead of the stake. The executioner stands beside the pile of wood. The flames are one word away. Joan is terrified, exhausted. She's been in chains for months, interrogated for 70 sessions. Her body is fragile. Her mind is wearing thin. She signs. Witnesses at her rehabilitation trial 25 years later would testify that the document she actually marked was only a few lines long. They'd swear the full confession the court produced afterward was fabricated, mended, revised, made far more damning than what she actually signed. But in the end, the text didn't matter. The trap wasn't the document. The trap was the act of signing. They march her back to prison. The crowd murmurs, some relieved, some disappointed. The spectacle is over, but not how anyone expected. She's going to live, condemned, but alive. Here's where the truth turns ice cold. Joan believes she's saved her life. She believes the promise was real. But her captors never intended to honor it. See, there are rules in medieval inquisitorial law. If you're tried for heresy and you confess, you can be spared execution. You get life imprisonments, still brutal. But life? That's mercy, technically. But there's a second category with no mercy: relapsed heresy. If you're a heretic who repents, then returns to heresy, you relapse, you're automatically handed to secular authorities for execution. No trial, no second chance. The relapse itself is the death sentence. The English needed her dead as a relapsed heretic, because if they just executed her after she'd confessed, it would look like murder, like the law was a lie. But if she relapsed, if she went back to heresies after signing, then it was all her fault. The law worked perfectly. She had mercy and threw it away. So they engineered the perfect trap. They took her right back to the same military fortress, still in chains, still surrounded by 5 male soldiers. They shaved her head as humiliation, and they gave her the dress that was supposed to save her, but actually made her catastrophically vulnerable. For months, Joan's men's clothing had been armor, not metaphorically, literally. She testified during the trial that she tied her breeches and tunic with dozens of tight cords, binding them so tightly they couldn't be removed without destroying the fabric. It was protection against sexual assault in a cell full of hostile men. Witnesses at the rehabilitation trial confirmed that English lords had attempted to rape her. The cords in her clothes were the only thing stopping them. Now she was in a dress, vulnerable, exposed, alone with 5 soldiers. The taunts started, the threats, the promises that if she didn't cooperate, worse things would happen. 4 days passed like this, and one night tanned. This is where testimony from the rehabilitation trial becomes absolutely critical. The guards took her dress. They took it. She was left with only the men's clothes they'd thrown at her in a sack. She had an impossible choice: face the soldiers naked and alone, or put on the forbidden clothing. She chose safety. On May 28th, 4 days after her confession, the judges came to her cell. Bishop Cauchon walked in. The other judges filed behind him. They found her in men's clothes. Joan explained exactly what happened. The dress had been taken. She couldn't defend herself among men without it. She had no choice. But then she admitted something else. Her voices had returned. Saints Michael and Catherine had come back to her, calling her a traitor for signing the confession. She never should have renounced them. That was it. That was the moment the trap slammed completely shut. By her own testimony, in the judge's presence, before witnesses, she had returned to wearing men's clothing, explicit violation of the confession, and admitted her voices had returned. Mission of relapsed heresy. The verdict was immediate, unanimous, no deliberation. She was officially a relapsed heretic. The promise of life had lasted exactly 4 days. Here's the truly diabolical part. Joan didn't understand what had happened. She thought she was being honest. She thought she was explaining her circumstances. She had no idea she was reading her own death sentence into the record with her own words. She didn't realize the judges had engineered a scenario where she had to choose between her safety and her survival. They took the dress knowing she'd put on the clothes. They left the soldiers in her cell knowing what would happen. They counted on her fear. They counted on her honesty. And they weaponized both. The English didn't need to torture her. They didn't need to break her will through theology. They just needed to set up the right circumstances and let her human need for basic safety destroy her. It was elegant, if you think about it. Evil, but elegant. May 30th, 1431. 800 English soldiers escort her to the old market square in Rouen. The pyre is tall. Ready? The wood seasoned so it burns hot and fast. They don't want this to drag out. They strip her, dress her in a white smock, put a paper hat on her head that reads, "Heretic, relapsed, apostate, idolater." She asks for a crucifix. A friar gives her one made of sticks lashed together with string. Just 2 pieces of wood and binding. But it's Christ. It's enough. She climbs onto the pyre. They chain her to the stake, not loosely, but tightly. They want to make sure she can't fall, can't try to escape, can't do anything but stand there and burn. The executioner lights the fire. The wood catches immediately. And witnesses reported this. She didn't scream. She didn't curse her judges. She didn't rage against God or the English or the unfairness of it all. Instead, she called out to the man who orchestrated her destruction. "Bishop Cauchin, I die through you." Not an accusation, a statement of fact. Her testifying to truth one last time, even as flames consumed her. Then she did something that would haunt every conscience watching. She asked someone to hold the crucifix up high, so it would be the last thing she saw. A simple request. A dying woman wanting to look at Christ while she burned. And as the smoke grew thick, as the heat became unbearable, witnesses reported hearing her voice above the roar of flames, crying out over and over, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." Not once, over and over. The name repeated like a prayer, like a promise, like the only true thing left in a world that had become entirely corrupted. An English secretariat man who had been part of the trial, part of the machinery that condemned her, watched her body blacken in the flames, watched the fire consume the peasant girl who had threatened an empire, and he cried out in the marketplace, "We are lost, for we have burned a saint." They did everything to erase her. After her body was charred, they raked back the coals to show the crowd her remains proof. She was a woman. Proof she hadn't magically escaped. Proof she was dead. Then they burned the corpse again and again. They kept burning until only ash remained. Then they threw what was left into the river Seine. They wanted her completely, utterly erased. Not even her dust could become a relic. Not even her bones could be venerated. But something they didn't account for was already in motion. 25 years later, Joan's family demanded a retrial. The Pope authorized it. Over 100 witnesses were called, priests who had been in the courtroom, judges who voted to condemn her, guards who'd been in her cell, notaries who recorded documents, and they testified under oath. They testified that Joan's confession had been manufactured, that the document she signed was nothing like what was filed, that her imprisonment violated church law, that the guards had been systematically abusive, that her dress had been taken forcing her into an impossible choice. That the entire trial was corruption from start to finish. The rehabilitation trial declared the original verdict a complete fraud. Joan's name was cleared. The Church officially recognized her virtue. Within a century, she was canonized as a saint. The English had burnt a saint, and history proved it. But here's what should chill you in ways historical facts usually don't. Joan of Arc didn't die in a moment of weakness or spiritual failure. She didn't die because she renounced God or betrayed her mission. She died because she trusted the law. She died because she believed there were rules that would protect her. She died because she signed a document thinking it would save her life. And the document was the trap. The system that killed her wasn't incompetent or chaotic. It was perfectly efficient. It had multiple fail-safes. Even when theology failed, even when it couldn't break her through rhetoric, it had a backup plan. It constructed a scenario where being human, needing safety, fearing rape, trying to stay alive became evidence of heresy. It weaponized her fear against her. And here's why this story still matters. We see this architecture everywhere now. Not always literal fire, not always scaffolds in medieval squares, but the same structure. Coerced confessions used against you. Legal traps where admitting truth becomes evidence of guilt. Systems that make it impossible to win. Where defending yourself looks like aggression. Where asking for basic protection becomes proof of criminality. Where transparency becomes incrimination. Joan of Arc didn't die because she was weak or wrong. She died because she was caught in a legal machine specifically designed to destroy her, and she had no way to escape it. She signed the paper because she wanted to live, and that want for life was turned into proof of her guilt. In the end, they got what they wanted. Her body turned to ash, scattered in the river, erased from the earth. But they couldn't erase what she'd done. They couldn't unmake the coronation at Reims. They couldn't take back Orleans. They couldn't unwrite the moment when an entire nation realized the impossible was possible. And they couldn't silence the last words witnesses heard above the flames. Not a curse, not a plea for mercy. Just a name, called out again and again until the smoke swallowed even that. Jesus. The only witness she trusted to remember the truth.